Hi, I'm Neil Ghosh. I'm about to have a productive conversation with Mike Verdi.
Neil, thanks so much for taking the time to join me today on a productive conversation.
Thank you. Excited to be here, particularly in this time in our life.
It, you know, uh, I was thinking about the title of your book, which I have an advanced reader's edition right here in my hand, Do More Good, Inspiring Lessons from Extraordinary People. And a thought came to me as I was going through it that I wrote down and I kind of did a comparison. And I think that it's really uh, I think appropriate for the kind of podcast that I host and the audience that I have is people are so focused on doing more that they forget that last word that you've got there. So the focus of being productive is to do more. Let's tack on that very important word at the end, good. Uh what for someone who is on that flywheel or that hamster wheel or whatever you want to call it, where they're just doing more, but they're maybe missing the point on that aspect of doing more good. Um, you've got lessons in here, and we're going to go through them, of course. Some of the people that you've spoken to, some that people would know, some that people would not. Um, when did you kind of recognize in your own life that doing more wasn't the answer, and you had to add that make sure that what you were doing was good?
It's a very good question. But before I answer, I want to mention one thing to you because it's contextual, I think. It's contextual in the sense because as I was listening to some of your podcast and interview, and I think it's somewhere you said that uh, productivity or any of those things is not one size fits all. And it resonated with me quite a bit. And I can talk about it later in the conversation because I travel the world. And one of the problems we have, we try to e- expect somebody else to do what I do, and it doesn't work. So I think that's my number one context before I answer the question that you specifically asked me. I think another point worth mentioning that we are living in a time of division, disruption, and digital overload. So I am truly grateful, not just you, Mike, but anyone who is helping us as a citizen to cut through the digital overload and able to slice bits of information here, bits of information there that we can take home and live a meaningful, purposeful life. So that's kind of my. So then I will tackle the question you asked me. I think as a very young boy, and this is nothing to do with the book. I was very young to even know of a book. What I observed, and I will give you two contexts. One, I grew up in a place called Calcutta, India, which is, in India, but you have to also understand the context here. India was a developing country. Now it has the growth rate is 8%. But when I grew up, it was very different. It was many, many years ago. So I actually saw poverty very up close. So there are a lot of wealthy people, a lot of, they're like anywhere else. And I think I also saw how small action, not big action, very tiny action can absolutely transform somebody's life. And that picture resonated with me at a very young age. And I kind of realized you don't have to be rich, you don't have to be famous, you don't have to be anyone to do good. I think, to be honest with you, that was kind of my early uh, memory. And I seeing even people don't have anything, but they give to somebody else. So, and I talked about it in my first chapter about my mother. So that's one. The second part will be when I traveled because of my career is anything but linear. I worked in nonprofit, I worked in private sector, I was in the international development world for quite some time. So I traveled to East Africa, West Africa, Latin America, Asia. So I have seen what it's like to live away from the comfort zone of where you are, and I am, and I have seen again the similar thing that I saw as a child, that even people with nothing, they are really emphasizing the word good in their life journey, day-to-day life journey. So I think that was an inspiration. And I felt strongly that if that's the case, then why don't I share the stories of famous people. There are some people are famous in the book, some are not. Some are just regular individual live in Washington and Virginia, and how they have able to shape life of many people just by doing good. So those are the lesson I carried, and I felt kind of obligation that I need to share those stories so that, one of the things I say, my journey now is to inspire individual and institution to embrace empathy and build bridges as much as we can and take meaningful action. So you can live, I know you have two children, I have one, so we can live a better world for them. So that's what keeps me going.
You know, you brought up something really interesting there that I think doesn't get talked about enough in this kind of forum, and it's the perspective of going elsewhere, leaving the comfort of home or the confines of your culture or your country. Obviously you grew up in Calcutta or Kolkata, I guess is now how it's pronounced, right? Kolkata, I think
Yep,
it's.
yep, yep, yep.
And then you're in the United States now. I mean, I grew up in Canada, but I've not been nearly to the many places you have, but I mean, when I've traveled to the Philippines, when I've traveled to other countries, not nearly as even to other European countries and things like that. I remember watching this documentary called Time Thieves that was available on, I think it was on Canopy or one of the free library apps. And I watched time management perspectives from the European, like from that side of the pond compared to ours. And it was very fascinating to see some similarities, but also some very distinct differences, like culturally. And when you go to those places, I think that it opens your eyes a lot and gives you perspective. How important is it for someone? Because I know you said when we've talked about it, like I alluded to, it's not one size fits all. There's nuance to all of this. But can we agree that broadening your horizons by travel outside of where you would normally go, let's say not to an all-inclusive or anything like that, but like to countries that are dissimilar to the ones that we're used to being in or that we grew up in, what role does that play, I think, in the impact of doing more good?
I will answer it, but anytime you ask me something, I have to kind of put some local context to this. And I think it's important, particularly now. And I'm not going away from your question, but I do really appreciate the question, but allow me to say this. One of the challenge I have about empathy, people think is soft, but I think it's a strategic. I think it's absolutely strategic, number one. Number two, I also have huge trouble. And again, I'm not saying everybody. We have this notion that in America, I'm talking now US, which is my home. Empathy is, as far as I'm concerned, and I can tell you stories after story, it's an American value, and I believe in it. It's not a red state value. It's not a blue state value. It's not a purple state value. So I am a big believer, and we can have a separate show on this. Why I say this, coming back to your question, we don't even travel to another state. We need to do a better job. I'm coming to another country for a moment. I have friends who are in such a bubble in both sides, in all sides. So they see life in that little zone. And I think we need to come out of that first before we go to Europe and Canada and even India. I'm fully accepting your logic that we must do that. All I'm saying first, let us come out of our neighborhood and meet our neighbor in, I deliberately traveled with my son to Wyoming, to Louisville, Kentucky, which is very different than my very, environment in Maryland where I live. So all I'm trying to say, yes, we must travel. We must travel and experience other culture, which I've been fortunate to have. But I also think we don't even, particularly in a country like US, is very different. If you go, even in Maryland, if you go to another part of Maryland, which is very different than where I am. And I think we have a tendency to live with only people we agree with and avoid people we don't agree with. I think that is also very much encouraging. And yes, to travel as well.
Well, and I don't think it's a uniquely American problem either, because I know some people. I live on Vancouver Island, and there's some that have never left the island, or or more interestingly, they've lived here their whole lives, but have never gone the 4-hour drive to Tofino from Victoria. They're like, "Oh, I've never been." I'm like, you grew up here. Like, how do you like? So it is a mindset thing, I think. when I was going through the book, you offer obviously the distinct parts of sit, rise, and act. We'll dive into each because I've got some specific stories that I want to kind of dive into a little bit more. But the first thing I thought about, because I talked to Mark Champagne about this when he wrote Personal Socrates, and there are other books that obviously model after that. I've interviewed people and learned lessons and so on and so forth. Tim Ferriss wrote Tools for Titans, and I mean this is an interesting way to kind of share shared wisdom, but the listening you would have had to do throughout this process. I think that's another thing that we could use a bit more of, is this willingness to sit and listen, not just hear and think, telegraph what our next move is going to be, which is why I try not to come with too many prepared questions to our conversations, because I want them to be organic. What role, first off, in writing the book, how challenging was it for you to, are you a good listener? Are you someone that sits and listens and are able to do that without flipping to, okay, what can I do with this mode in between the listening? Like thinking ahead to the writing and all that stuff, as opposed to being present and just listening. And secondly, you can dovetail off of this if you want, the importance of listening when one wants to do more good.
So the first context is that, unlike the other two books you mentioned, I know one of them, I don't know another one, that writing a book was never a plan. So none of this interaction happened for the book. So it's very important to understand that. It happened, and I just happened to meet some of these people in the journey, whether through my personal life. And because of my profession, I worked for the Australian government for 5 years. I worked for the Dutch for 9 years. I worked for the Austrian for 3 years. I was a defense contractor in US government in DOD. So what I'm trying to say, it was not planned. So that's something to keep in mind. So I think it happened somewhat organic way, because I think because of my job, some of them was work related. So I kept notes in this conversation. That was part of the journey. So listening is very important. And I think now, coming back to your question, you asked me about listening. And that's the reason I kind of started the conversation about digital overload. I deliberately try nowadays to listen carefully, not just from the media, but the individual I'm meeting. A lot of people I don't agree with, and I'm coming back to some of. I think you will see me coming back to the same core conversation at one point in time. I'm taking a deliberate path to listen to people who I not necessarily agree with. And that is also part of this conversation. One of the things motivated me to write the book, that I think we are all, but yeah, I do listen carefully, and I do take a lot of notes in terms of, sometimes written notes, sometimes on my phone. And I make sure I understand where the other person is coming from without coming to a quick judgment. I think that's something I am very, very careful about, that we have a tendency to make quick judgment based on a soundbite, based on something we hear, but we don't have the context. So for me, I think it's listening, but also understanding the context where this is coming from. I think that gives me a much better understanding of what I heard and put this in context or overall what's happening around us.
So as I was going through the book and looking up at the different people that inspired you and the lessons that you learned from these extraordinary people, we touched a little bit on the political aspect of things, which we don't dive into too much, but I couldn't help but notice as I was going through, there is a mix here. It's not just, there is the echo chamber does not, you're walking the talk, so to speak. And one of the ones that I really wanted to dive into was the chapter 11 on John McCain, honoring your principles. I think that I remember watching him interact, not only when he was running against Barack Obama for president, but also the way he held himself in his role as a senator, right, for the state of Arizona. And I mean, just the way he carried himself. And then when he passed away, the unilateral, coming together of people from all sides of the spectrum. No matter, whether you're lean left, lean right, or Republican, Democrat, what have you. And, I have to say that you mentioned empathy being a value that is held wide, like it's widely held. It's not something that is forced. It's something that is just entrenched, right? So when you started to look at the John McCain piece and you see these principles, do you think that we are so caught up, and this circles back to my original question of the doing, like just doing more, the speed of society, the overwhelm, our principles tend to get lost in the shuffle, and that's why it was an important lesson for you to share, is like, look, at the end of it all, this is what you have. Like, you should honor them.
Right. And I would remind all the listener that is listening to your show, of course, you realize everybody in the book, pretty much except two I met. And some of them I work with, some of them I just met. But one thing I'm sure all your listener will remember, there was a town hall meeting when John McCain was running. And there was a lady in the audience said something pretty derogatory comment about Mr. Obama. And even today, it gives me goosebumps. Even today, when he said, "No, ma'am, we have disagreement, but that's not who he is." Mike, my life now is all about getting that message home every opportunity I get. Every opportunity I get. So yes, absolutely. And when I met him, of course, we had a wonderful conversation, but maybe something interesting for your listener to even, I did share in my book. I waited for a long time to share this story. I actually met him and at that time Senator Biden at the same time. And it's an important American story because this is what America looked to me most of my time here. And I was shaking Biden's hand and I said, "Am I shaking the hand of the next president of the United States?" He was a senator. And he gave me a big smile. And he said, "No, that's not me. That's my friend next to me." And he pointed to John McCain. So again, it was a light moment, but it shows the friendship beyond politics. Friendship beyond politics. We may disagree, and that memory is still very fresh in my mind. So coming back to McCain again, yes, I think I definitely value what he stood for as a senator, the causes that he championed, the way he handled a lot of conversation. I think that's American value I hold very dearly. And you have a chapter here of Ross Perot. So you are absolutely correct. I got lucky because I also had opportunity to meet him. And I spoke at his wife's event in Texas. Uh, but anyway, coming back to your conversation, yes, that what encouraged me to write McCain chapter.
Well, and I think, again, we get caught up in the doing. So, I mean, I just finished reading a book, Brianna, for our my membership community. We have a book club every month, and we read The Mountain Is You by Brianna Wiest. And one of the things that comes up in it is principles. And it's so challenging in a world that is so hell-bent on speed. I mean, efficiency without knowing what you're being efficient about, like just these words being thrown around, and not leaning into things like values and principles. And you mentioned soft, like empathy is not soft. It's not. And I think once you hear the terms, I mean, that's why, I mean, a colleague of mine, we've talked about, like, they don't like use the term hard skills and soft skills anymore, because the soft skills tend to be diminished because no one wants to be soft, right? Like, no one wants to be, like, you have to have the hard skills. But I remember when I was working my way up at Costco, one of the things that was said to me, and this is, of course, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, was, you've got all the hard skills, but you need to work on the soft skills. And that only comes with, I think part of that comes with age, experience, not just experience in your own life, but the experience of meeting others and learning from them along the way. We touched on, before we hit record, how my son and I spent some time in DC, and we went to the Air and Space Museum. And so, and we're talking about serving and so on and so forth. Well, John Glenn, of course, would be somebody that you also met. You talked about that in the book. But serving with humility, to me, I feel like I've gotten better at this, where I'm willing to say I don't know about something. You know what? You know how, like, especially around your kids, like, and I actually think it's done them a great service for me to say to my kids, I don't know, as opposed to like making up some answer or saying, I'll find out for you. That middle path of I don't know, it's such a wide open, vast area of exploration as opposed to a conversation ender. To me, it almost feels like a conversation starter, but it starts with that humility. And right now, I think the world could use a nice little dose of humility, and we probably could lead, like you said, ourselves could lead that with some small actions. Can you talk a little bit about the idea of serving with humility and where maybe that fits in, especially in a world, like I said today, that's hell bent on us just go, 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 fast, 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 now, now, now. And if you show any sign of not knowing, then you're less than.
I will share the similar story because that is relatable to you. You talked about your son. So when my son, I have one, he is now doing his MBA at Kellogg. He was very young, and I said, Ryan, I'm not your only role model. He was very confused because he always thought I'm his role model. I said, no, 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 no. I'm only one person, and there are some good qualities I have. You should follow me. But others, and then I pointed out to many people that I knew as his mentor. And at that time, he was totally confused because he saw I'm this perfect guy, and I was insisting I'm not a perfect guy. I'm just a guy, and I have some good qualities we should learn, and some no, don't learn them. To be honest with you, and then I pointed out to other people. So I think that is something I hold very dear to my heart. And another, interesting moment, he asked me that, Dad, and out of the blue, he said, Dad, were you a nerd or you're a bully when in school? And nobody even asked me this question. I'm like, I came out of nowhere. So I said, no. I said, well, I was not a nerd. I was not a bully. My role was always protecting the nerd against the bully. And I just didn't realize that. And it's still, that's my role I play. And I'm very much, that's kind of, my who I am. So I think humility plays a big role in our life, right? It's knowledge is power, but sharing knowledge is superpower, right? I think sharing knowledge is superpower, and I think that understanding and bringing back to my son, and you talked about your son. I'm repeating that because that value is important to. This is our legacy, Mike, right? This is our legacy. When you or I are no longer here, what do we leave behind? And at a very young age, I used to write down in a piece of paper that live and let live. It's one of the core principles I believe in, and don't judge people, and be humble. Those are something kind of ingrained in my values from my parents, and I continue to share them with my children and the people I talk to. So I think humility is absolutely critical. Absolutely critical.
It's actually a nice dovetail into this question about the construction of the book. So again, we talk about part one being sit, second part being rise, third part being act. But I don't know if this was deliberate. I imagine it was. That chapter one is living with empathy, talking about your parents. And then the final chapter, chapter 29, leave a legacy, talking about your son, which you just alluded to. Was it important to you that you bookended it that way, or was it just something that kind of happened?
No, I think that was very deliberate, and I think right before we started the conversation, you talked about legacy as one of the things we are thinking about. And for whatever reason, I always felt it's very important, and this is the way I saw life. I always felt that having a purpose is extremely important. My purpose doesn't have to be your purpose. You have a purpose. I have a different purpose. And I'm coming back to not one size fits all. So for me, purpose and legacy was always something I greatly value. And I think for me, I felt where my worldview has greatly shaped by where I came from, what I saw as a child. And I spent quite a bit of time writing about my mother. I called her the 24-hour empathy machine. And I observed as a child, we didn't have much. So it's a very different understanding, and I mentioned somewhere that we had empathy at our home before we had television, gas stove, any of this normal. We didn't have it. So but what we had was empathy. So it's something I carried with me. And ending the chapter with Ryan was again deliberate, because then what do I leave behind? All these other people are just, happen. But ultimately, our children and people who don't have children, not everybody has children, but what we leave behind is extremely important for me. And we leave behind by donating, we leave behind by our lesson, we leave behind by what we have done. I'll give you one fantastic example. There was a magazine interviewed me from Success Magazine, and the journalist felt the book was inspiration for her in terms of she recently lost a friend who passed away, and she felt that once she passed away, he realized how this particular individual, he was a coach at a high school, and he touched many, many people, not his own kid, but many people. So she felt the book's power of understanding what a legacy can do is enormous. So that was her angle of interviewing me. And I thought I was very touched by the angle she has taken. So legacy is extremely important. And yet it was very deliberate, very deliberate.
Do you think that some people try too hard to shape their legacy with the sense that they have complete control over it?
We don't have any control
I
over
know
it.
that. I'm just saying that I think a lot of people, like, I'm being general. I shouldn't say a lot, but there are definitely instances out there where people talk about, like, I'm building a legacy, I'm legacy building, and you kind of from the outside looking in. And again, this is from an objective perspective. So they may, I mean, it's kind of like I look at this from the perspective. I bring this up a lot of the time with Thanos, the evil supervillain from the Marvel movies, where he said, "I'm going to snap half the people out of existence." In his mind, he was doing it because, well, we don't have enough resources, so I'm going to make the universe better by, like, obliterating half of its population, which from his vantage point was like, hey, this is a good thing. Everybody else like, no, 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 this is bad. I think that in some instances, when you hear people like, I'm building a legacy, I'm leaving a legacy, I'm working towards my legacy, they have this misconceived notion that they can they can control it, so they're going to put all their efforts into doing something in a way that, ultimately at the end of the day, I mean, you and I both know, like, we can leave a legacy for our kids, but we don't know necessarily what they're going to do with that or how they even view it 100%, right?
Have 100%. So let me take a little, little bit, let's take a little deeper dive into this. So for me, I always kind of feel, five things. There are more than five, but I'm just giving you five that kind of resonate with me from the book that helped me as I think about legacy. Right? One, I call it, power of reinvention. So what I mean by that, I'm not trying to be Mike. I'm not trying to be anybody else. I'm just trying to be a better version of myself. So for me, that's part of as I define legacy for me, that I'm constantly trying to be a better version of myself. That's a reinvention part. The second thing I believe in my legacy, the way I see legacy, is passion is a transferable skill. I worked as a waiter. You talked about Costco. I worked uh, in the field with farmers. I was in a boardroom. It doesn't matter where I am. I brought complete passion to whatever I do. So for me, that's also kind of where I feel my legacy. And hopefully that is a constructive legacy. So number two, passion is transferable. Number three, we touched on a little bit. I'm a big believer of mentorship, huge believer of mentorship. If I look back in my life, there are mentors who opened doors. There are mentors who corrected me, who told me, don't do this. So there are many different people came into my life. So I try in my own way to meet as many people, young, old, doesn't really matter. So I share knowledge, whatever I know. So I think that is also I see, and it is not my son. When I say this word, it's much, whatever the world I'm moving in. So I think the third piece or leg of my legacy building is mentorship, is as much as I can, and also learn and give back. I do believe, and this is where the book comes in, doing more good is a competitive advantage. Okay. You think about in this divided world or this all this thing happening, most people will like to buy, we like to invest, we like to do things where they see a value, where they see something that is good. It's just a human nature. I don't care what area, what country, which politics you believe in. It's a human nature that we believe. So doing good is, particularly in this noisy world. And the fifth is coming back to circle of this legacy conversation. You are your story. Your brand is your story. My story is different than Mike's story. And I always believe everyone has a story. Everyone has a story. So that's when I say legacy, these are the five pillars I talk about or I think about, and I try to convey in my book that my story is my legacy, whatever that might be. So those are the five pillars of the way I, at least I see legacy.
Last question I have before I let you go. Uh, Again, there's a lot of lessons through a variety of people, both infamous, famous, and somewhere in between. Uh, what was the one lesson that surprised you the most from the source that it came from?
I'll give it a shot. This is not an easy answer. It's not an easy answer, but I'll give it to you anyway because what comes to my mind. I think Shimon Peres, because if you look at his history, uh, and I'm not a history genius, but in my rudimentary knowledge, if you look at history, what his belief system was, and how he transformed himself, he realized you cannot kill your way out of to peace. It's something really, really resonated with me, and I think I will say that's something I believe strongly for transformation and having an open mind and see the reality and come to and completely change your view on something. I don't see any problem with that. I don't see any problem with that. People changing their view after we learn something new and we realize something new. So I would say Shimon Peres.
You know, it's funny. I think about the topic as soon as I go in there. I learn of the subject matter, and that's that area that he was involved with. I know little about, and it's a very complex scenario, and it's very polarizing too. Obviously, even today, and I mean, it's been going on for what centuries, right?
Yeah, right.
Um, it goes back to the humility part, where I've had people ask me what my thoughts are on it, and I'm like, I have a sense of what I believe, but I don't know 100%. Like, it's
Yeah.
nuanced.
Same here. Same here. Yeah.
And what I love about what you've done here, number one, with this book, you don't need to read it in sequential order, right? You don't need to. I mean, you pick it if you're looking for a particular lesson, you can go there. There's also, takeaways at the end and so on and so forth. But you brought this up at the top, and we kind of, even before we hit record, and of course is the importance of nuance. Nuances is such a huge factor. And I think that when you see this, all three of these words, do more good, there's so much nuance wrapped in them. So if someone picks up this book, Do More Good, Inspiring Lessons from Extraordinary People, with the foreword by the Dalai Lama, by the way, uh, what is the takeaway that you would love to see people who pick up this book, not just, upon first glance and perusal, but, when it's sitting on their bookshelf and they know that it's there. What's a takeaway, the big one that you'd love to see people take?
It is absolutely critical that do more good is a call to action. And that's the reason every chapter there is a list of organization I listed so people can take action. Yes, it is about celebration of empathy, celebration of courage, celebration of impact, celebration of legacy. But this book is all about action. This is not a book to feel good about and put it back on shelf. It is about doing something. And if you and I'm very grateful, not just Dalai Lama, but when Clinton read it, Bill Clinton read it, Sherry Blair, which is not their wife of Tony Blair from UK. She just sent me a note last week that she loved the book because it's action oriented. So it's about taking action. And I think citizenship it's serious business, and we take it for granted. We take democracy for granted because we don't know what it's like not to live in a democratic country. So I think all this is important, but most importantly, action. It could be a small action. I call myself a micro philanthropist. I go to a gas station, I put my 50 cents to St. Jude. I'm a philanthropist. So the mindset change that I am little, I'm not powerful. I'm just trying to break that. We are very powerful, and we have to take that power seriously and take action.
The book is called Do More Good, Inspiring Lessons from Extraordinary People. Neil, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. Where can people pick up the book and keep up with the work you're doing?
It's available really everywhere, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target, Walmart. But let me give you my website because all the links are there. It's really my name. So Neil, NeilGhosh.org, neilghosh.org.
Thanks so much for having a productive conversation with me today, Neil.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you, Mike.